All right, welcome to our workshop. We call it Falling Apart Syndrome, and it's all going to be concentrating on the upper extremities. So, when I do these topic workshops, they're about different conditions or focus, but we think of them as body signals. And when I think of people, when they talk about this particular ache or pain, my shoulder problem, my elbow problem, sometimes people will identify themselves with a condition. And our culture it's engineered to push us towards sickness and disease. We see it all around us, chronic illness. So when I see chronic conditions showing up, then it tells me that there's signals the body's giving us that are not being recognized and addressed. So when I think of the image I have in my mind, my vision of the world, my vision is a world where the natural state is extraordinary health. That's my vision. So I know in everybody's life there's the life of possibility and the life of probability. And the life of probability is the one that if you keep doing what you're doing, we can expect you're going to get. The life of possibility is not a default setting. It has choice. It's something we choose. It's something we actively participate in to make sure we're not just defaulting to the standard in the culture. And it's that life of possibility that I want to engage with people with. And the first step in that life of possibility is to commit to living unconditionally. And so it's an interesting play on words, how we can get sucked into thinking of something as a condition, but our way out of that is to actually live unconditionally. So we're going to start from that place, and we're going to explore this category of the upper extremity. And we're going to dive deep into it. We're going to unpack this so that you leave with an understanding that allows you to take this information and work with it immediately. All right, does that sound good? So we're going to look at what's the anatomy, what's the physiology, how does it all work in the optimum way, and then what do we see breaking down in our culture, and why is that happening, and what can you do about it? Okay? So away we go. Everybody, raise your hand. And some people, you can't raise your hand, right? Yeah, because when you have shoulder pain, elbow issues, wrist problems, it gets in the way. So it's even hard to participate in life when these things are going on. And, we can make a joke about it, but we know that people that are plagued with these concerns, it can keep you up at night, it can interfere with your relationships when you can't pick your grandkids up or your kids up, when you can't do your work. So all of these things, our life is affected by this. And if our life's affected, oftentimes other people in the family, their life is affected as well. So let's get real about this, right? This is something that really impacts people's quality of life. And they oftentimes will try to learn to live with it. And our culture will tend to push them in the direction, the conventional approach is to pound it with drugs. And then when that doesn't work, go to the injections. And when that doesn't work, go to the surgeries. So I think there's a different way we can look at this. It can completely transform people's experience with trouble or with body signals concerning their upper extremity. So we're going to jump right into this and look at this idea of body signals. So symptoms are body signals. It's our body's way of asking for help. And instead of listening, in our culture, we're trained to just mask it. And can we just make that symptom go away, and I can carry on living my life the same way so I don't have to make any changes? That's what people wish, and that's what they'd like to do. But the key here is, are you actually listening? And it's learning how to read our body's signals. When we can read those signals and respond appropriately, then we can actually get to the underlying deeper issues that are there. And when that starts to heal up, then the outer issues, you know, the underlying pieces are addressed, then that tip of the iceberg where the call for help is coming from, there's no need for that anymore, and that just goes away. So instead of masking that call for help, let's recognize it, let's address it, and let's move into looking at that deeper part. All right? So the first thing to understand about the whole upper extremity is that it's a very complex joint system. And there was a guy back in the 1850s or so, and Rouleau, I think his name was, and he looked at systems and recognized that in machines with systems, when there are joints and pieces of that system, each individual articulation will affect all the others. And I've got a little prop for that I want to show you here. So you guys have all seen this before, right? Mm-hmm. The toy for kids. But you can see that when I work with something over here, it's affecting the entire system. When I impact it over here, it's affecting the entire system. So the real key to working with the upper extremity is to recognize that, you know, the old shoulder injury from football, over time starting to affect the elbow. Next thing you know, it's affecting the wrist and it's going up into the neck. So these injuries from the past, they can start to stack up. And they can start to, there's a whole chain, what's called a kinetic chain, where they're all connected. And if we don't address the above and below, the upstream and the downstream, then oftentimes we're not going to get to the underlying fundamental concern and the best way to address it. So this kinetic chain for the upper extremity, it's known as an open kinetic chain, simply meaning that it's not weight-bearing. So our lower extremity, our hips and downward, this is a closed kinetic chain, and it's stable, and it can withstand a lot of structural weight, but it's not as mobile. So the trade-off with the upper extremity is that it's not as stable, but it has lots of mobility to it. And that's the key understanding, is that instead of this being a bony structural kind of joint, this shoulder joint is an open, unstable joint that is mostly composed of muscle. It's a muscular joint rather than a bony joint. Mm-hmm. So looking at the muscles is where we're going to actually get a lot of value. So the shoulder pain that then leads to less range of motion, that starts to stress the elbow, the wrist problems. Next thing you know, there's numbness in the hands and the fingers and so on. And as these concerns stack over time, we start to call it FAS, falling apart syndrome, right? Where people are saying, I must just be getting older, like all those old traumas, they've caught up with me. And so let's recognize that certainly traumas can be part of this picture, but that old trauma that you just didn't heal up from properly, the reason, let's look at the reason why you didn't heal up properly from it, and what's happening right now in your life that is perpetuating these faulty mechanics that are then leading to these issues. So, here's what it is. What is it that's causing it? It's lifestyle. It's our lifestyle that causes this perpetual reoccurrence and plaguing over and over and breaking down over time of these upper extremity issues. So, what is it that all of these folks have in common in these pictures? What do they all have in common?
You're doing something with their hands.
Yes, they are. So that's all upper extremity things. What else do you see happening here? Okay, I'm going to give you a clue. They all have this going on.
Oh.
Right? I mean, you can see it right here very classically, right? And why is that? Because everything's right here in front of us. So when we're eating, when we're working, when we're biking, even when we're grooming in front of the mirror, when we're on the phone, when we're reading, when we're texting, right? Can you see that? And even when we're sleeping, right? We have this, everything we do is in this forward hunched posture. And so what's happening is all these muscles along the back are getting weak and deconditioned. And when that happens, then that throws things a kilter in how these joints, upper extremity joints are designed to be working. They're not meant to be in a hunched state. So there may have been some early injuries that set things off, but it's all of this that perpetuates it and keeps it into a state of breaking down over time. So that's what's really important to recognize that. And then the other factor, besides the postural piece, and the postural piece will contribute to this, is that there can be subluxations, nerve interference. So just as review, we know that the brain is in charge of running everything. It sends the messages down the spinal cord, out through the nerves, and as long as the messages get from the brain down through the spine to the cells and back again without interference, you get to be healthy, which includes healing up from injuries. But when there's misalignment or subluxation in an area, it starts to affect the nerves that come out through here. And the nerves that are in charge of the whole upper extremity come right out of this area of the spine right here. So C5 to T1 is the nerve supply. And there's a whole plexus, so these nerves, they all come out, and then they join together in a plexus, and then they will come down the arm, and then it'll branch out to affect all of the cells as it goes down the arm. So that's the nerve distribution. So if we don't look at that piece, then we're going to miss a big part of the function of the whole upper extremity. This can be the reason why we didn't heal up from something in the first place. This can be the reason why we don't have efficient function, and the brain's got a vague idea of how it's running that area, but not the precision that it needs, especially for repetitive motions and that sort of thing. Right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So when we talk about subluxation, remember all subluxations, the features of it, first we start where the vertebrae are misaligned, and then that creates inflammation in the joint, irritation and inflammation. Now when there's irritation because of the misalignment, the muscles all around that joint are going to want to protect the system from that wear and tear that comes from that misalignment. And so it'll strap down that joint, it'll lock it up to try and protect it, because too much motion when it's misaligned creates more and more nerve irritation. It can create inflammation in the disc as well. That can be part of the picture. That swelling in the disc can put pressure on the nerve as well. So that whole complex of the subluxation, it leads to soft tissue damage, the inflammation and nerve irritation, and then the muscle spasming that can occur. And when that muscle spasming occurs and it locks down that joint, the disc in between those vertebrae, now it has lost what's called imbibition. Whoops. My elbow just sent it forward. That's funny. There we go. So when we lose imbibition, what that means is the disc itself in the middle of between the vertebrae, and I'm going to just pass this around here so you can take a look. That's the disc right there. So that disc in that vertebral unit, when that muscle locks it down, the disc doesn't have a rich blood supply. And so the way that it gets nutrients in and gets toxins out is almost like squeezing a sponge and letting go of the sponge, so that fluids will get sucked in and pushed out from movement. And so when you lock that down in spasm and it doesn't move, now the disc doesn't get fed and it builds up toxins. And that causes it to start to break down more and create more inflammation. And that's what happens to the soft tissue in that area. And so that then leads to joint fixation, where it really gets locked up, and then degenerative changes, and over time we might even call that arthritic changes that occur. So that's part of what happens with the whole subluxation complex over time. So when we look at shoulder problems, what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to cover the most common ones that I see. It's not an exhausted list, but it's the most common. And if there are any other particular questions that you have at the end, I'll do my best to answer those. But let's start with the most common. So the rotator cuff tendinitis, that's the most common that shows up. We're going to unpack each one of these. Shoulder instability, bursitis, thoracic outlet syndrome, the acromioclavicular joint, the AC joint pain, and frozen shoulder. Those are the most common ones that we encounter. So if we look at the shoulder anatomy to start with, we have the scapula here in the back. So if you were to, this wing bone right here, right, that's the scapula. And the scapula it actually just floats on the back of the ribs. So it's not attached to anything back here, it's just floating right back here on the back of the ribs. And then it reaches up with this finger right up here, and there's the arm bone. So it articulates with the arm bone there, right? So you can see the scapula has got the arm bone, and then it's just floating on the back of the ribs. And then there's one other little collarbone here that comes across and articulates right there. So this whole structure, the arm, the scapula, the clavicle, right here, those little, you feel those little bumps right here in the, right at your bottom of your throat? That's this joint right here, this sternoclavicular joint. That's the only attachment, structurally, bony-wise, to your whole frame. The whole upper extremity's only attachment is right there, that one tiny little joint. Isn't that amazing? And then this is another tiny little joint, and the rest of this is just kind of hanging on there. Isn't that amazing? So that's what we mean when we talk about it as a muscular joint. We're looking at the bony structure here, right? There's not a lot to it, right? So this whole joint is really about the muscle action on how it works. And so if we have weakened muscles, now what's going to happen to that joint over time, right? It's going to deteriorate and lose its function. So this is the first thing to understand about that, is the anatomy of the bones and the joints with it. Now, if we look at the muscles, the rotator cuff is kind of what protects this whole area. Kind of it holds it in place. And so if you were to, right here, if you were to just take my scapula and peel it off and open it up, there's a muscle on the back, and that's this muscle right here. So this would be like we were looking at someone from the front, looking straight through them, and here's the back of their scapula. And you can see this muscle right here. This is the subscapularis muscle, and it pulls right through to here and attaches to the front of the arm bone. Yeah. And then on the back of the scapula, you have these three muscles that work together. The teres minor, the infraspinatus, here's the spine of the scapula, and the supraspinatus. So the most common muscle in the, when they talk about rotator cuff injuries, the most common one is going to be this supraspinatus right here. And it's going to be this kind of uncomfortable, achy, sometimes sharp feeling right in through here. That's that supraspinatus. Familiar, huh? Yes, yeah. All right. And so oftentimes, you know, this again is going to come from those weakened, deconditioned muscles. It's going to, when this is not doing its job, it now starts to create a lot of instability, because those rotator cuffs are stabilizing this joint. And that, of course, can then lead to inflammation, pain, and further instability. And repetitive stress, doing things over and over again, is one of the things that will lead to that joint malfunctioning from rotator cuff. So a second one is bursitis. So bursitis is where there's a little bursa right here. This is called a little bursa, and it's a little fluid-filled sac. And this fluid-filled sac rests there because it's there to protect the bony protuberances from the soft tissue that's running over it. So if you had a muscle running over a pointy bone, it would be like the sharp corner of something and taking a piece of fabric and rubbing it back and forth, and over time it's just going to wear it right out. So if you have this little bubble in between, a cushion that it can go back and forth over, that's the purpose of the bursa. The bursa is there to protect the soft tissue from the bony tissue. And so that bursa can get inflamed as well. And so if I go digging around in there and someone kind of like is jumping up off of the chair from it, that's a sign of, like, that's probably some bursitis that's in there, where that bursa has become inflamed. And again, it's oftentimes overuse. And it's also, again, posturally, if we are out of alignment posturally, we're going to put more stress on that bursa. And again, there's inflammation and pain that comes from that. So the things that tend to cause the bursitis are when we are doing things a lot of times over our head or out in front. Over our head is a very common one. So some people will actually even sleep with their arms up over their head or on their side with their arms stretched out. And so that's one of the things that can pinch down on that bursa. And driving with the straight arm at the top of the wheel, that kind of thing also can start to, if you do that as a habit, is another thing that can start to irritate that bursa as well. And then there's something called thoracic outlet syndrome. So this bundle of nerves that comes out of the neck, it runs into the brachial plexus, right? It joins all of them together, and it runs into a big nerve coming down the arm that then divides and goes down. But right when it comes through here, you can see it comes right underneath the collarbone. So if we have good, upright, open posture, that collarbone's in the right place, there's plenty of room there. But if we sink down and have poor posture, right, now that clavicle is starting to compress on that that bundle of that brachial plexus bundle that comes through there. And one of the things that can really aggravate this, besides the postural piece, is when we're lifting and carrying a lot of things. Like, do you ever have that situation where, and actually before I go to the next slide showing the causes, let's remember it's not just from lifting, that nerve impingement there, it again is resulting in inflammation, and it can affect the entire upper extremity. You can get pain, numbness, and tingling going all the way down the arm, and you're trying to figure out what's going on down here when the cause is up here. Exactly. So it can be a bit elusive to understand what's happening when there's that compression happening up in the clavicle. So what are some of the activities that seem to associate with this? It's that lifting thing. So it's like, can I get it all in one trip? Right? And have anybody here guilty of that? Right? Yeah. Like, and actually, if we think about it, if we took less and walked more back and forth, that'd be a much healthier thing to do as well. So we don't have to get it all in one trip. That's the first lesson. We need to kind of rest this area if we're working too hard with it, if we're lifting too many heavy things. So that would be one of the factors. Check this out. Have you seen our kids these days, right? They've got like these 90-pound rucksacks. It's like they're little like rangers out on patrol, right, with this packed full. And look at the pressure that's going to put right on that area, right through there. So they're setting themselves up as children to grow into that as adults. And we're seeing it showing up in kids as well. Shoulder problems, trouble down into the arms and the hands. Okay, another one is the AC joint pain. So that tends to be right in the very front. So the AC joint is the acromioclavicular joint. So this part of the scapula that comes up, the acromion process, articulates right here with this clavicle, acromioclavicular joint. And so that joint, what happens is when we're doing a lot of that lifting stuff and it's pulling down and we're carrying heavy things, it actually pulls down on the scapula and the arm drops down and the clavicle is flipping up because of that. It loses its connection there. And so when that misaligns, it puts a lot of stretch and strain on the ligaments of that joint. And so that creates a lot of tenderness, point tenderness and pain, kind of more in the front in through here. So again, it's a postural piece. It's the physical stresses. We also find it with people that are stressed out. Oftentimes it'll be right in that area too. The subluxation of that misalignment of that joint itself, and then the subluxations not controlling the musculature here if there's subluxations coming from the neck. And of course the pain, the point pain that can be there as well. And what are the things that tend to cause that AC joint pain, right? Don't moms just have these hips that are exactly right for carrying a kid, right? It fits so perfectly there. But meanwhile, as that kid grows bigger and bigger, that arm is taking on some of that, and that's part of that tugging that occurs where that disconnect starts to occur. And of course, the purses are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Now, I tend to be somebody that carries very little in a purse. But I have girlfriends and sisters-in-law and like people in my life that they've got these big purses, nieces, right? And I wonder, like, what are you actually carrying in that thing? You know, like, we're just going out for a few hours. We are coming back, right? Yeah. No need to bring all of your possessions with you. And yet somehow we tend to do that, don't we? So that's an important thing, is to really be careful about how much we're carrying on that shoulder, and they're just getting bigger and bigger. So we really got to cut back on that and go lighter, go simpler and lighter. And there actually is a serious condition called big purse syndrome now. But you can see what's happening to the spine here, right? Right? That cannot be good, right? And that could actually be affecting the lower spine, the digestive system, right? Yeah, from that kinking that occurs trying to accommodate the big purse. And guys, yeah, you're guilty too. We've got the man purse now that we're seeing more and more of, right? And so, and you know, and then not to mention, of course, the computer bags and the messenger bags and all of that. It all weighs down on us. And then the other factor that we have to also acknowledge is just the weight of our bodies, that our body mass is getting bigger and bigger. Obesity is growing. In fact, the last statistics that I looked at, we're now finding 75% of our population is in that category of obesity. It's become normalized. And so not only are we carrying more external weight, but our body weight is weighing down on us as well and contributing, especially posturally. So it's one thing to have this frame and now add a lot more weight to that to have to carry around all the time. You can't put it down. And so those are parts of the things those are some of the things that will contribute to this as well. And then there's frozen shoulder, also known as adhesive capsulitis. So frozen shoulder is that situation where when a person tries to raise their arm, here's the normal, and they can't raise this arm up anymore. It gets locked up. And so frozen shoulder can be really hard to address. It can be a real enigma to the conventional models. And so what we find is it's very interesting that frozen shoulder, oftentimes the problem here is actually coming from the skull not sitting the right way on the top of the neck, and the brain's perception being shifted so that the musculature all goes into spasm and it locks right up. And it's amazing when we get that occiput set right, that all of a sudden people they get freed up when something that's been plaguing them for sometimes years. Yeah, so that can be very perplexing, that frozen shoulder, and so chiropractic has had really good success with that. And so all in all, shoulder problems, we find that they are going to be coming from either the occiput, the base of the skull, that C5 to C7 area. So when I'm looking for where are there subluxations associated with this, these are the levels I find. And then T1 to T4, this is the nerve supply that controls, it shows the organ function on this chart, but these muscles in this area are controlled from these nerves that come out from between the bones in the upper thoracic spine, in the lower cervical spine, and then the base of the occiput as that travels down and communicates into the shoulder. So what can we do about it? So certainly we can get adjusted to get the nervous system clear so the brain has full awareness in very specific ways of how it's running the body, and specifically the upper extremity. But what can we do for ourselves? Rest is important. So that repetitive stress, and if we've had an injury and we go back too soon and we don't let it heal up, that combination of not resting enough, just going and going and going. Icing it can be helpful because of the inflammation locally that occurs there. And then exercise, and there's some very specific exercises that I want to show you so that you'll know how can you really build the foundational muscles in this area, because it is a muscular joint. How can we make it healthier and stronger so that it can be there to support us with the activities that we want to do. And that will then reduce inflammation if the muscles are able to do their work the proper way. So remember, again, in any scenario, we get our best results when we use this three-legged stool of correction model. So adjustments in a rhythm, right? Healing happens in a rhythm. So when someone has a subluxation pattern, getting them adjusted in a regular rhythm is where we can get our best results. That's where I can do my best work. Breaking the bad habits, so we can see what some of those ergonomic postural bad habits are. And we saw that inflammation was a key piece in all of these situations. So living in an anti-inflammatory diet would be another factor that could help that. So breaking the bad habits of diet can also help. and dealing with stress effectively, because oftentimes when we are stressed, that's when we go into this hunched posture. So managing our stress more effectively actually can help our shoulders better. How many people here carry stress right here? Like they know if they've had a stressful day, it goes right into their shoulders, right? So that's very common. And then finally, the exercises to strengthen the spine and also to strengthen the shoulder. So I want to show you a little bit more of those muscles, and then I'm going to show you the exercises to help that. So here's the bone, here's the scapula. There are the pivoter muscles, which are the serratus anterior. I'm going to show you that in a moment. That's a muscle that it comes around the front of the ribs here, right in through here. And that's one of the pivoters that pivots the scapula. The rhomboids come right through here, and again, they're one of the pivoters. The lower traps come right up here, and then the levator scapula is here. The protector muscles are what we already went over, the rotator cuff muscles. So the subscapularis, the infrascapularis, the teres minor, and the suprascapularis. And then we have the positioners. So the deltoid that's the muscle group that is in charge of helping to just position the arm in a certain area. And then the propellers, that's the ones that when we want to really get lots of motion in that joint. So that's going to be the pectorals in the front, and then the latissimus down in the back here. So let's check this out here and look at these. So these muscles right here that you see on this boxer, right? Yeah, that's the serratus anterior. And guess what? You have those too. Yeah, they're not maybe as well defined as that, but we all have those. Yeah, and so in that sport and with that kind of training, they have very well developed, because what are they doing with the upper extremity, right? They're using it. So we have that. Then the trapezius, this is this triangular muscle that comes down. There's the lower trapezius here, and then the upper trapezius up in here. So upper traps and then lower traps. And then we have these other muscles here, the rhomboid muscles here that we talked about. So these are the scapular pivoter muscles that we see here. And these are the ones that are at the deepest layer of muscle. So the other ones that we talked about, like the rotators, that's up on the outermost layer. These ones are the deepest layer, the foundational layer that's going to support the shoulder joint. So I want to show you some exercises that you can do that can help to develop the strength and the tone of this foundational layer. So these are the ways that you're going to bulletproof your shoulder. The first is called the push-up plus. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to have you on the floor doing push-ups. I want to show you very specifically what this one is. And I want you to hold your arms out in front of you. If you want to stand up, you can. You're going to hold your arms out in front of you, and then I want you to push your arms forward and then pull them back. Keep the elbows straight. Yeah. So pushing forward and pulling back. Can you see that? Pushing forward and pulling back. Right now you're working your serratus anterior when you do that. Pushing forward and back. So you can do it in space, just keeping the elbows locked as you do it, right? You can do that in space, or you can actually do it against the wall. You can straight arm and then just sink in. Yeah, just sink in, arms straight, and push out. And sink in and push out. Yeah, keep the elbows straight. We tend to want to bend them, but yeah, and push out. And you want to maximize that, so sink in as far as you can. Yeah, and then push out as far as you can. That's it. And once you get good at doing it on the wall, then you could get a chair or a counter, and you can lean into it, and you can sink in, and then you can press out, and you can sink in, and you can press out. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is called the wall angel. The wall angel. So all you're going to do is you're going to be right up against the wall, and you're going to try to kind of flatten your whole back against the wall, and then you're going to put the back of your hands and your forearms against the wall, and then you're going to rise up, and then you're going to slide them down as low as you can, and then going up, and then down. Right, so that's the wall angel. And then the last one is the reach, roll, and lift. So this one, it's actually kind of hard to do, this one. What you're going to do is, you're going to be on the floor, and I'm going to show you a modification if it's hard for you to get on the floor. But you're going to be on the floor with the elbows on the floor, and you're going to reach out, and then you're going to pivot, and you're going to lift it up and down. And the other side. You're going to try to keep that elbow down, reach out, pivot, and lift up. It's really hard to do. It looks so simple, but it's hard to do. So you could also pull this off on a counter. So you can reach out, lift it over, and lift up. It's harder to do on the floor, but if you can't do it on the floor, you can still do it there. Lift, turn over, and lift up. Okay? And so you want to do these about 8 repetitions when you do it. Okay? All right, so now let's go down the kinetic chain, and we're going to talk about the elbow. So the most common things with the elbow is bursitis. Again, there's a bursa in the elbow. And then also there's tennis elbow and golfer's elbow. So let's look at those. When we look at the elbow anatomy, now this joint is actually a more solid joint than the shoulder. And so the ulna, this forearm bone here, that makes up the elbow right there, fits into the arm, the upper arm, the humerus there, and that is a really pretty solid joint. Whereas the shoulder joint, it's a very shallow joint. It's called a ball and cup joint, but when you think of the hip socket, that's a ball. It's almost surrounded by that hip joint. The shoulder joint, it's a ball with this like curved surface resting against it, kind of floating there, so it doesn't hug it. But the elbow joint, it hugs it pretty well, and it really just keeps us doing this motion, right? That motion is from these 2 bones here. And then the radius is what allows us to have this rotational movement of our forearm and our elbow. And so this looks kind of like the head of a nail, and so that will rotate back and forth with that joint. So that's the anatomy of the joint itself. And so there is a bursa right here, and that little fluid-filled sac. And so you can imagine if that was a bony protuberance and you've got this muscle going here and you're doing this all day long, that's going to wear out. So the bursa is there to protect that. But the bursa is not really there for us to protect it from weight bearing on it. It wasn't meant for us to be weight bearing on it. It was meant to be able to slide back and forth over it. And so when there's bursitis, again, it can be a postural thing where we're slumping in our posture, leaning on our elbows on the table. Didn't we learn bad manners? Don't put your elbows on the table. There's a reason for it. So it's the physical stress is there, it's the inflammation and the swelling that can occur there. And the things, again, that cause that tends to be putting our elbows on the table whenever we're doing things, so eating or other times. So start to notice if there are times when you may not recognize how often you may actually put weight on the elbows, and that can really irritate the bursa. All right, and then if we look at tennis elbow, so tennis elbow is also called lateral epicondylitis, and that's where the forearm muscles that are the extensor muscles, they attach right into this place right here. And so when we have overuse of that joint, of doing this motion, overuse of that, it creates inflammation and pain. But again, let's remember that if there's altered biomechanics, if we're hunched over, we're not going to be using that as efficiently. If there's subluxation, then the brain is not running this area as efficiently, and overuse can happen more easily. So this is tennis elbow when it's on the outside joint right here, when it's tender right over here, right in this part right here. And that's from too much of this motion here. So tennis, like that. Okay, and then golfer's elbow is the opposite side, it's the inside. Yeah, and that's because of too much of this motion here. So with the golf clubs. Again, it's overuse, inflammation, pain, same dynamic, just different overuse motions, different repetitive motions. And so the people that have tendinitis on either side, they're going to tend to be manual laborers, so painters and carpenters and garbage men that are picking and hoisting and throwing things around. Maybe sheep ranchers, or like I'm thinking of farmers, or like manual laborers. And another name I like to call these folks is occupational athletes. So different from professional athletes, that they only have to have bodies that are fit and there for them for maybe 4 or 5 years, make their money and then retire. But occupational athletes, they need their bodies to be in shape for them for a long time. And if we think of this idea of the professional athlete that is training, and they're repeating things in their training over and over again, they get stronger, stronger, faster, faster, more and more accurate, right? But why is it that these people that are doing their job over and over again, and they're breaking down from it? And so we have to look at what the reason is. And it could be that there's poor form, that their posture is off, and it could be that there's subluxation, that their brain just isn't able to run it as efficiently as it should, and that's why it's breaking down. So if we can clear that nerve connection so that the brain knows fully what's happening, then it can adapt to that, and you can see yourself getting healthier, stronger from that repetitive action rather than it breaking down. All right. And so elbow problems tend to be more from the C5, C7 area of the spine. When we look for subluxation areas there, that's the level we tend to find that. And for self-care, of course, it's the same. Rest, ice, exercise. Massage can be very useful if there's scar tissue, and to move the lymphatic fluid if there's swelling in there. So that's another thing. You can do self-massage, or you can receive massage from someone. And again, same thing. We want to correct the subluxations. We want to break the bad habits and do the exercises to strengthen. So the exercises for strengthening for the elbow, let's see if I have it here. I'm going to do it right now. The best thing for, if it's a tennis elbow, the best way for strengthening these wrist extensors is actually to take a rubber band. And I want to show you what to do and what not to do. So you take 1 or 2 of these size rubber bands, and this motion, that's the best way to strengthen these muscles here, the extensors. You don't want to go with one of these like lobster claw, kind of organic broccoli kind of ones. Then you're going to hurt yourself if you try to use that. So don't try to like really test yourself. Just use 1 or 2 of the small ones and start from there. Okay, so that's for the lateral epicondylitis. If it's more of the medial, we tend to have pretty strong muscles doing this with our regular activities already, but if you wanted to do even more strengthening of that, then grabbing onto a tennis ball and squeezing that is one of the best ways to strengthen this muscle. And that's to prevent the medial epicondylitis, the golfer's tendinitis, golfer's elbow. All right, and so next we're going to move down that kinetic chain now right into the wrist problems. And I will tell you that probably 90% of the carpal tunnel complaints that I encounter, it's coming from subluxations in the neck. 90% of them. And especially folks that come to see me when they've had the surgery and they've had the PT and they've had everything addressing the wrist itself and everything's failing, hands down we're going to see that there's going to be subluxation in the cervical spine. So carpal tunnel syndrome is a classic example. Pain, numbness, tingling, weakness in the wrists and the hands is what we see at times. Now with carpal tunnel syndrome, I want to give you the anatomy here of the wrist. It's a very complex joint also, and it's amazing actually what we can do with our wrists and the way it's designed. So we've got a whole series of bones in here, and if those bones are all lined up, we can do amazing things. But if those bones subluxate, if those bones misalign, then it really, just like that kinetic chain, it's going to alter the whole function of this area. Now, this is just looking at it straight on, but if we look at it coming at it like this, all these bones actually form an arch like this. And then there's a ligament that runs right across the top of that. That's the carpal ligament, right? And it actually holds it all together. So as long as the bones are lined up and this is doing its job, then it's going to hold it together, and there's a tunnel. And that tunnel has bones and lymph fluid and blood vessels and a big nerve, the median nerve, going through there. So if there's misalignment of the bones or there's inflammation in the nerve coming through there because of subluxation in the neck, then that inflammation takes up more space, and now it starts to compress. There's not enough space for if you add swelling and inflammation, and especially if you misalign the bones in the wrist. And so now you can actually cut off the nerve supply, blood supply. You can get the tinglings, sometimes you can get the sharp pains into the hand. And so the solution, the conventional solution, is to cut this ligament here. And what we find is it may provide short-term relief, like, oh, phew, the pressure's off. But what we find over time is it then deteriorates the whole function of the wrist, because that ligament actually had a purpose of holding it all together. So we see that it doesn't have good outcomes over time to have the carpal tunnel surgery. That's what the research shows. So when we're addressing carpal tunnel, we're going to clear the cervical spine first, and then we're going to make sure that there's good alignment in the wrist bones themselves as well. The most common overuse type of activities is going to be vibrational jackhammer type of tools. So Deb, no more of that now.
Okay.
And of course the classic working at a computer with the wrists bent too much, and even riding on a bike, and sometimes that pressure on the wrist itself when someone's riding long rides on the bike. So one of the good solutions for the keyboards, if your elbows, your wrists are bent too much, is just roll up a little towel so that your wrist can rest on that, and it can put you in more of a neutral position as you're using the keyboard. And wrist problems, again, same area, C5 to C7, that's the classic area of subluxation. Self-care is going to be, again, breaking the bad habits, using the ice, and also if you are in a profession where you have a lot of demand on your wrists, even just simply taping, put a little bit of tape around the wrists, can just support the wrists, so that that support will can actually prevent you from irritating it and causing further problems. And again, of course, adjusting the subluxations, breaking the bad habits, and the exercises to strengthen. And we actually have so much use of our hand. Rest is a really important part. If there is inflammation in there, icing and rest is a really important part of that as well. Some people will do exercises like this, where they can use the hand muscle, and then even just things that, even just self-massage of just recreate the tunnel, right? Imagine that tunnel is in this shape, and then just recreate the tunnel. All right, and now the final exercises that I want to show you that can affect the whole shoulder and really improve the whole shoulder, because these are the ones that are actually going to go after that posture. So remember, we started this whole talk with recognizing that it's the posture piece that's the big culprit that gets unaddressed, that's not addressed. And so this is one of the best ways to address this. Besides chiropractic care of your spine, the thing that will allow me to do even more, cover more ground with you and do better work with your spine, is if you're doing these exercises. So I like to use the acronym, you will love these. You will love these. And the name of this is also known as life extension exercises, because if you do these, they're so healthy for your spine that it literally can extend the life of your body. And you want to do these with the same idea as brushing your teeth. You brush your teeth to extend the life of your teeth. So you want to do these exercises to extend the life of your physical body, your spine and your shoulders and your neck and your back. So this is how you do them. You may stand up. So the first one is the Y. Right? So your hands are going to go up in a Y shape, and you're not going to just have your hands hang out there. You're going to stretch them out. So you're going to be working, and you want them to be as upright as you can, right in line with your ears and your head up, right? So you want proud posture, and you're going to stretch them for a good 20 seconds. Take a deep breath in, and then out, and then you can drop it down, and you're going to go into the W, right? So YW, you will. And the W, you want to take your elbows and stick them right into your back pockets. So you're pushing down and back, trying to get those elbows into your back pockets, right? Good stretch there, right? And then taking a deep breath in and then out, and then at the last moment before you release this, you're going to push even more into them, and then you're going to drop into your L. You will love these. So the L shape, you're going to drop those hands a little bit more, that's it, and the elbows come in a little bit more, that's it. And the idea here is that you want to gaze at the horizon, gaze forward, and you want to bring the hands so they're out of sight, so you can't see them. That's a good stretch, yeah? So you're kind of pivoting, rotating the elbows back, and you're squeezing the scapula together.
Are your elbows still right next to your body? When
Yeah, or close, yeah. They don't have to be touching, but close. And then, but the key motion is the rotation back, yeah. And so you're gonna breathe in, and then out, and again, just try and make them disappear by stretching them back, right? And then you're going to go right into the T, and you're stretching them out, again, palms up, thumbs back, and again, get them out of sight, stretch them back, and then proud posture, that's right, breathing in, and breathing out, a couple of breaths. And then you're also going to be pointing those fingers, stretching them away from your body, working actively. Active work. And then you can come out of it. All right, and then find somebody to give a high five to. Right? So those exercises, you want to do them twice a day. So, you know, it's about 7:30 or so. So this is your evening one. And then tomorrow morning you want to, brush your teeth, do your life extension exercises, and then tomorrow night you want to do them. And the best way to remember how to do them is to teach it to somebody else. Teach it to somebody else, right? So you will love these. That's the acronym to remember. The Y, W into the back pocket, L, disappear the hands, and then T. Disappear the hands. Proud posture the whole time. All right. So that's everything that I wanted to review with you today. And so if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Let me just finish up here.